Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. It's been quite a while since we last spoke about the cyclocross riders on the road, but just after the Tour of Flanders, after the Cobble Classic season is basically over with the postponement of Paris-Roubaix, it is about time for us to talk about those riders. And with me here today to do that are Tom and Twan.
Hello.
Good evening.
So we last spoke just after the Strade Bianchi, and that was before Tirreno Adriatico, and that brings us in Tirreno Adriatico, a race where Wout van Aert was targeting his first ever GC, but he definitely didn't forget how to sprint there, winning the first stage and hunting for that GC. Twan, what expectations did you have going towards Tirreno for his GC ambitions?
I was very cautious about them, I think. I thought he could probably do a nice top 10 placing if he managed to hang on to like a 15th place in the mountain stage. But we saw other things.
Yeah, indeed, for the people who don't know, and I can't imagine that he went on to win that. But if you look at it, was a very great race. The first stage ended in a mass sprint. Van Aert, he beat a couple of good sprinters, Ewan, Gaviria, Merlier also in there. Merlier not having a clean sprint has to be said, but nevertheless a very strong and powerful showing there by Van Aert. If you go further to that was a flat stage. Then you get a couple of more classic type of stages, more what you can probably compare a bit to what you have in the Ardennes Classic, light hills. And there we saw a great battle between Van Aert, Van der Poel and Alaphilippe in there as well on the mix. Van der Poel and Van Aert sprinting it out for wins. What were your guys' thoughts on those two sprints where Van der Poel first ended second and then the day after he managed to get that win?
I think on the second stage we see one of his weaknesses, which has to be said, it is positioning. Just having to come from a bit too far, if I recall correctly, and he maybe had the speed to beat Alaphilippe, but it wasn't to be. But on the third stage, he got it right, and it showed in the final result.
Indeed, yeah. I think the second stage was a bit more of an uphill finish, which suited more Alaphilippe, the lighter, smaller rider. But yeah, there are some really great sprints in the race, and yeah, but I think it was a pretty level playing field with the three big names of Van Aert, Van der Poel, and of course the world champion Alaphilippe as well.
And that positioning from Van der Poel, that's poor. That's something that we will come back to more often during this episode, because it wasn't only an issue in the sprints there in Tirreno, but also in the classics. What's going on? Why, Twan, you already said it earlier that you thought he had some kind of issue with positioning. You were right. And how do you think this is happening? I mean, back then we were a bit guessing. Has anything noticed you that you think might be the reason for this?
One thing that I would say, like, especially seeing in mass sprints, he seems to be not scared, but he seems to be more cautious when there's a lot of people around, and he doesn't really like racing with that many people around. There have definitely been cases where he's just had very good positioning, but also plenty of times that I feel like with how good he is, he should have been like at least 2 rows up on where he was in that moment in the race.
And Tom, do you think that is maybe one of the only disadvantages of riding for a smaller team like Alpecin Phoenix, that if he would really have a super strong team like the Koenig Quickstep have, that they could bring him into position better?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Alpecin Phoenix have really showed themselves to be a great team this year, actually. They've not been as strong as Quickstep, and the Wolfpack are certainly the classics team to beat. But I would say they've been a really close second behind. We've seen the likes of Vermeersch, Ricard, and they've had a lot of domestiques who have also been getting in the top 10, the top 15 even. And Van der Poel's not been isolated without his team. I think he's had some good, strong riders with him as well. So I don't think we can blame the team for this one, in my opinion.
Well, if you flash forward 2 days after that win of Van der Poel, you are past the mountain stage, and then you come to one of the most heroic stages that we have ever seen. Van Aert hangs on to the leader's jersey. Oh no, he just loses the leader's jersey to Pogacar, but he holds on to the second place in GC. And then you get this very rough stage in wet weather, and Van der Poel, he goes solo with, what was it, 60, 70k to go in a downhill in the pouring rain, and he rides a solo, gets 3 minutes, and in the last 10 kilometers he's so dead that he loses 2.5 minutes on Pogacar, who attacked in the background. I mean, that was one of the most epic solo rides I have ever seen, or at least in the modern history of cycling.
Absolutely, it was a phenomenal ride from Van der Poel that day, and yeah, I think it also was it in the Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. He launched a long range move as well, and I think we've kind of really seen that Van der Poel's turning from a sprinter into this kind of long range rider as well. He's just all round, as you know, phenomenal talent, and yeah, this year we've seen some of these longer moves again, showing he's kind of got another thing in his locker.
Yeah, that stage really reminded of me of what he did last year in Binkbank. He then also went on quite a long solo, and just in the end he struggled a little bit with energy, losing a lot of the time that he had gained. But in this Tirreno, the conditions were even more epic. The riders around him in the field were like even better than they were. It was really insane what he pulled off there.
And then you had that last stage, which was a time trial, and I mean, Van Aert didn't stop impressing us. I mean, he was winning that time trial actually in front of Kung and also in front of Ganna and Pogacar. I mean, really impressive stuff by Van Aert, and I think this is definitely a very strong showing by him in Tirreno, and I think it just shows that he really can do basically anything, and if he improves his climbing just a bit, it will probably cost him somewhere else. But if we purely speak hypothetically, I think that if he does maybe a bit less extreme transformation than Tom Dumoulin did, that he could actually become a GC contender more regularly.
I think he has shown that he has the capacity to compete, at least for top 10s in Grand Tours, and that's at the very least. Because what he has shown here, I think, just finishing behind Joao Almeida, finishing ahead of, Egan Bernal, probably not in optimal conditions, let's be honest. But he is finishing around riders that are really, really good. And I think even if he doesn't transform his body, he could go for top 5 in Grand Tours with lots of time trial kilometers.
Yeah, I think he would need a bit more of luck in a case like that. Things would really need to fall together. And don't forget, he took a lot of bonification seconds here in the Tirreno, and it's probably harder for him to also take those seconds if he's up against the Sam Bennett and the peak Caleb Ewan in a race like we could potentially see in the Tour de France.
Yeah, I think you cannot be a GC competitor and a sprinter in these races. So we've seen Van Aert comment over the past few years about putting on like 8 to 10 kilograms even since his younger cyclocross days. And yeah, if he lost some of that weight again, he might lose the top end sprints, but obviously the power to weight and could be improved for his climbing if he really wanted to target the GC in races like the Tour de France.
If we then look further into the season after Tirreno, we had Milan-San Remo, and going into this race, Van Aert and Van der Poel were the clear favourites, like by far. But if you look at the race, they didn't truly live up to these expectations. On the Poggio, Van der Poel was really badly positioned. I think it was like 30th going on to that climb. At the end, there was an attack from Alaphilippe, and Van Aert could counter. Van der Poel needed to come from far, but could counter. However, I think that this was the main reason that these riders couldn't break away. Jasper Stuyven perfectly moved tactically to jump away and take the win. Van Aert third, Van der Poel fifth. What do you guys make of that? Were those good enough results, or was it still maybe a bit of a disappointment?
I think, like Twan said earlier, the positioning is such a key. And at the bottom of the Poggio, there's a real pinch point. There was a really big group going into it, with the two chasing groups having just combined together to form a big peloton. And yeah, Van der Poel was so far back. He just did not have the right positioning, which meant he really was on the back foot the whole of the climb, and ultimately he did lose the gap to Alaphilippe and Van Aert and had to close that one down. Whether he'd been up the front, he could have launched himself and it could have been a different story in the final, but yeah, I think that positioning really made the race.
Yeah, I think at the moment the two groups merge, if I recall correctly. It's Van der Poel sitting all the way at the back, having some fun even, it looked like, with some men at times, and pointing out something about his bike as well. But he was totally at the back of that group. So when the two groups merge, he gets swamped by a whole bunch of riders, and this idea of easily being able to move up a smaller group is just completely gone. And I think that is something that he missed in his calculations when he decided to go for that plan, or seemingly decided to go for that. And I do have to say, Caleb Ewan looked absolutely insane on that day. And it just didn't look like the attacks were quite sharp enough to actually be able to drop him.
I think you're slightly mistaken, because Van der Poel, indeed, he was at the back. He did fall further back when those two groups merged, but important note here is that when these two groups merged, Van der Poel had two teammates, or maybe even three. I know De Bond was there for sure, and they positioned him, but they simply came too early because his teammates were smoked, and then Ganna took over and Van der Poel was alone, and left, right and center other riders were being brought into position, and he simply couldn't get onto any of the wheels and he fell back. But I agree, Caleb Ewan was looking very strong, and yeah, I mean, also that sprint that Ewan put in on the Via Roma, I think it would have been very hard to beat Ewan either way on that day. Well, from there on, we move into Belgium for the four classics, E3, Gent-Wevelgem, Dwars door Vlaanderen, and Ronde van Vlaanderen. E3 was the first one. And Twan, can you give us a very short summary of that race?
The Koenig Quick-Step sort of team attack, there's really struggled to get in that echelon. Asgreen rides off the front, a bunch of people try and chase him down, never really close the gap. Then they finally do manage to catch him, and he attacks again with a few kilometers to the line, and leaves everyone with two people from the Koenig Quick-Step in that group behind, and they never get back home.
I think E3 is probably the most difficult race to draw up conclusions about, considering the cyclocross riders, because that team attack of Quickstep was on the Taaienberg. You saw that Van Aert and Van der Poel were there. There was a select group that was, in my opinion, looking to race towards the finish line. But what happened? Van Aert had a puncture, and basically his whole team paced back an entire group of 50 or what riders, and because of that, Asgreen could anticipate, and there were other riders up the road, and there from there then on, Van Aert and Van der Poel were just chasing other riders. And I mean, if you're already chasing, putting in a lot of efforts, and then also facing 3 or even 4 riders from Quickstep, I mean, it's just impossible to do anything against that.
Yeah, they really try to use the hills as launch pads, trying to close the gap as quickly as possible while hopefully dropping some others. We saw that on the Tirreno, of course, where Wout van Aert went all in and basically gave Mathieu van der Poel a lead out to try and get back up there, dropping himself.
Tom, about that move there on the Tirreno from Van Aert. Van Aert, it's not something that I've noticed throughout all the classics, basically, that he's, to me, lacking a bit of acceleration. That maybe I don't know why that could be, but to me it looks that, yes, he still has power, yes, he still has the raw numbers, but as soon as you really need to accelerate, in my opinion, it looks like he is lacking a bit, because every time they accelerate, he's dropped, and after that he can continue doing the same pace as riders like Van der Poel.
Indeed, yeah, I would agree with you on that. Yeah, I don't really know how to provide an explanation for this, but yeah, we see he's kind of lost a bit of the kick in his legs, and yeah, I think perhaps it could be could be his weight. He's a bit bigger than some of the other riders and bigger than Van der Poel as well. So yeah, it could be just more mass to get moving, but yeah, I think he's still shown he's got the sprint with the win in Ghent-Wevelgem. But yeah, I would agree with you on the kick seems to be missing.
Anyway, from there on, that attack there on the Tigenberg Van Aert was off, and he ended up in a group with a rider that we haven't discussed so far. I mean, Vermeersch, for Van der Poel, we can be pretty clear about that. Van der Poel, he did a lot of work, couldn't counter Askreen. He was pretty tired after all the efforts he did, ended third in the end. But Vermeersch, this is really the first time. We already talked about him, of course, but this is the first time that he really makes that step to be able to contend for top 10s in real important classic, despite actually being a helper for Van der Poel. I think it was really impressive what I saw from Vermeersch there. Did quite some work for Van der Poel and then still managed to get 9th, and it's certainly much more than I expected before this season started.
Especially after what looked a bit disappointing in the cyclocross season, I must say. This road season has been absolutely insane, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe go the same way as Tim Merlier and really taking the cyclocross as a nice bonus in the winter.
Indeed, yeah, I would agree with you on this one. Really surprising, great to see, and I think he's been really working hard to the domestique in the early stages of the race, closing down the gaps. But then we have also seen he's had the freedom to be able to kind of sit and cruise in the back of the smaller groups coming into the last kilometres without the pressure to work in quite a few occasions with Van der Poel up the road. So he's still had some fresh legs for the sprint, and he's shown he's got a really good kick on him as well, Vermeersch. So yeah, I could see him following the direction of Merlier in the future for sure.
I think that definitely wouldn't be a bad move, and I think that the brothers Roodhoofd really have a good signing with Vermeersch, and I think that it will probably, he should in my opinion still continue doing cyclocross, considering that his results this winter weren't bad. He maybe shouldn't make it his full focus and more put it in function of his road season, and I think that really does help him, because if we look at the next race, Ghent-Wevelgem, he again ends in the top 10, which was another really crazy race. Ghent-Wevelgem, for almost 200 kilometers they were riding in echelons and attacking, and sometimes groups looked to come back and then eventually they didn't. That was a really wild race as well. And then Vermeersch again ending 10th there. Yes, he wasn't in that first echelon, but that wasn't his job. Basically all day he had been working for Tim Merlier and Jasper Philipsen. These two riders couldn't make it over the Koppenberg. Vermeersch could, ends 10th in the end, also with a decent sprint, beating riders like Van Avermaet and Lampaert. Once again, just like we just said, it's just a confirmation, that result there in Ghent-Wevelgem, isn't it?
Yeah, but it was the Camel, wasn't it? Not the Koppenberg.
Yeah, it was the Camelberg, sorry.
Yeah, just riding a sublime race when he was finally released from team duties. Yeah, this man has done some crazy things this Classics campaign.
Well, that race there in the first group, there was Wout van Aert in that group. He went on to win Ghent-Wevelgem, and he looked to be riding a completely different race compared to what he did in E3. In E3, he was working a lot. In Ghent-Wevelgem, he was more looking like it as if he was a pure sprinter. Do you think that was a smart decision? Yeah, of course he won, but do you think that was really the best that he could have done, or should he potentially have tried to attack?
I think he rode it well. It's a bit of a different kind of race with the hills coming in the middle and then the longer, flatter run into the finish. And yeah, I think when the other sprinters were kind of dropped, he saw that he was still there and didn't really feel the need to push. He didn't have the urge to ride. Knowing that he was the strongest finisher, I think he played it tactically pretty well. Not pushing too hard and still being fresh in the final. And yeah, he took the win. So overall, strong performance there from Van Aert.
Well, from there on, we went to Dwars door Vlaanderen. And Van der Poel, he took an off day there, but that didn't mean that there was no action from cyclocross riders. Tim Merlier sprinting to a third place there before he had already won the Bredene Kokzijde Classic and done some pretty good sprints in Tirreno Adriatico. What did you guys think about his race there in Dwars door Vlaanderen?
I think Merlier rode a solid race, not in the right group exactly, but able to come back in the end there and still able to put in a very powerful sprint, winning the group sprint as Christophe Laporte went for a late attack, so he wasn't really part of that one. Just very strong sprinting by Merlier this season, and I think especially in some of the smaller races, it was absolutely insane what he was able to do.
Yeah, I think when Van der Poel has helped Merlier with, obviously he's a great lead-out man, both of them work well in combination. But yeah, Le Samin, GP Jean-Pierre Monsieur, and also in the Breda Coxside Classic, 3 wins out of 3 for Merlier there. So yeah, he's certainly got some nice form as well.
I think the races like that in Dwars of Vlaanderen, Le Samijn, these lighter cobble races / classics, I think these are really the races that Merlier excels in. I mean, we're recording this on Monday and will be uploaded on the day of the Scheldeprijs. It's another race I expect Merlier to do pretty good in. These are the type of races that he really excels in. And of course, in the flat sprints, I'm really looking forward to what he can do in a Grand Tour. Well, then our last classic of the Cobble Classic season, and that was the Ronde van Vlaanderen. I mean, we don't really need to go into all the details of this race because once again we could clearly see that there were 4 riders who were stronger than the rest, and that were Asgreen, Van der Poel, Van Aert and Alaphilippe. These riders attacked multiple times, got away. Sometimes riders like Haller and Teuns could hang on. Sometimes there was another rider that couldn't hang on, but these riders were clearly the strongest. And then, I mean, let's look at it then. We had a leading group of 6 riders at the top of the Kruisberg. Asgreen, Van der Poel, Van Aert, Teuns, Alaphilippe and Haller. If you look at that group, you see these riders there. What were you guys thinking at that point in the race?
First of all, I'm thinking, what was Marco Haller doing here? Like, this man he's a good rider, but he's mostly just peloton fill in some of these classics, sometimes anticipating. But what he did there, he had a day of his life. And at that moment, I think we have seen that Asgreen might just be the best person. Although I did think that Van der Poel would be able to drop him on the Paterberg and Van Aert as well, if it really came down to it. So I didn't really see an opportunity for Asgreen to win, but he looked like the strongest out of those riders there.
I was actually thinking that Van der Poel was the strongest there, because I had seen him close some gas pretty easily, but I agree, Asgreen looked to be the second strongest. I had already seen that Alaphilippe and Van Aert, if it was really going super hard, that they were just slightly in trouble. And that was already a sign for me that if Asgreen or Van der Poel goes, that they would probably need to drop. But that doesn't mean that they are without a chance. However, they quickly, basically, half of the group was basically put outside of a chance of victory when there was an attack by Asgreen, and only Van Aert and Van der Poel followed. Alaphilippe did nothing, and the 2 guys of Bahrain, they were simply just done. They just couldn't do anything. You saw them eventually getting caught by the chasers and then dropping back to 40th place or something. They were really done. They tried what they could, but then with those 3 guys in the lead, they went to the Oude Quaremont, and there we saw on the top an attack by Van der Poel, and that attack again. I mean, if Van der Poel attacks, it's always special. It's not like an attack by Asgreen, which you can see coming, or that he just builds up speed. I mean, the acceleration there, that was again something else. I mean, the way he accelerated, his bike, it seemed to be out of control. That was once again like so strong.
He does attack on the Oude Quaremont. I have never seen something like it. That was so powerful. That was so quick. Yeah, no wonder the other guys had to let a gap.
Indeed, I think like in Siena we saw in the final of the Strade Bianchi, like that attack in the final as well was just another level, and this again, he shows he's got one of the best kicks in the peloton by, for sure, Van der Poel.
Yeah, I agree, and Asgreen, he could come back. I don't know, I think Van der Poel potentially waited a little bit when he saw Asgreen was closing in, and then on the Paterberg they looked to be equal to each other, and then that sprint there for the win was a big surprise, Asgreen being able to beat Van der Poel. Do you guys think that Van der Poel maybe forgot to eat, or was maybe that attack on the Oude Quaremont really all he had, and should he have potentially saved that attack for a sprint for the win?
I think the race is about 260 kilometers long. I'm not sure you can even keep on eating enough to have something left in that final sprint. Eventually, it is just done, and I think that is what happened to him. Maybe he could have eaten a little bit more, maybe not.
Yeah, I think both riders were feeling obviously really fatigued after the big day out in the saddle, but also both were trusting their abilities. We didn't see anybody attempt to break away in the final. They were both keen to leave it to the sprint. And yeah, I personally would have thought Asgreen would have been the one looking to distance Van der Poel on paper. But no, he proved everybody wrong. And yeah, he took the win.
Quite a remarkable sprint that. I think we will remember that for quite some years. Once again, another fun race there in Flanders. And Van Aert, he fell back eventually after he got dropped there on the Oude Quaremont into a group of chasers, really parking it up the Quaremont. What was going on with him? Because he didn't seem very great there in Flanders. Combine it with what happened in the E3 race. What do you guys make of this? Is it maybe just a bit of a dip of form, focusing too much on climbing, or potentially anything else?
I think this the extra focus he let onto the climbing part of his abilities, it might have cost him just a little bit. He wasn't as extremely good as he was last year, although he was still very, very good here. I don't think we should be underestimating that as well. But it's just last year he looked like superhuman, and this year he very much did look human.
Van Aert 6th, 1 place in front of Johnny Vermeersch. Again, a very strong race. I don't think we need to discuss anything about him unless you guys have anything to add, because I think we basically discussed everything about Vermeersch in the previous 2 races.
Yeah, indeed. I think we've said enough about his great performances, really, this Classics campaign, and hopefully we'll see some more of him in the future.
Yeah, and I think he is put himself in the role of riders that could one day win a semi-classic if everything goes right, like for Van Baarle, for example, in Dwars door Vlaanderen.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, there's some riders that we shouldn't really consider cyclocross riders, but who do ride cyclocross because they either enjoy it or they think it improves their riding abilities. Turgy riding a very strong campaign here as well, getting in top 10 in almost all of those races. We saw Henry Gauster, who did good in the openings weekend, not as good after that, but again at 20th place in Tour of Flanders, it's definitely not bad. It's a respectable result, especially if you're 37 years old like he is. I think that's also showing that cyclocross can help you build a higher base level, because his results ever since he started doing cyclocross at an older age have definitely gone up compared to when he didn't. So I think there is definitely some truth in it that it does help you build a very strong base.
Yeah, and just I think triggering some different muscles a little bit as well, and just reliving that whole thing in your body maybe that you had when you're like 20 years old. That also definitely helps mentally as well, I think, and that's a very important part of cycling.
But certainly there's a lot to look out. We have the Ardennes Classics coming up as well, with Pidcock riding those, and in Amstel Gold Race Van Aert will be riding, and Quinten Hermans, he will also be riding races there. So certainly a lot to be looking out to. Van der Poel will be focusing on mountain biking soon. We will keep an eye out on that as well, leading up to the Olympics in Rio later on this year. But I think we've had it for this episode. And Tom and Twan, I would like to thank you guys for coming on with me today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And with that said, we will be keeping an eye on the rest of the races and come back with a new podcast when we have some interesting races to talk about. See you guys then. Goodbye.